The ticket was bright orange, stuck to my windshield like a slap in the face. Illegal parking HOA violation, it read in aggressive, all-caps font. I stood in the middle of my own cul-de-sac, coffee in hand, staring at it like it had personally insulted me. I wasn't just parked legally, I owned that space. In fact, I owned every space on the block. My name's Everett Dalton. Retired city planner, now semi-professional headache for the Oak Creek Trails Homeowners Association. I bought this street 8 years ago when the original developer went bankrupt and auctioned off the remaining assets. The city tried to purchase the parking easements, but I beat them to it. For about the cost of a used pickup, I ended up with title rights to the entire strip of parallel parking on both sides of Pecan Loop. I didn't make a big deal out of it until this morning. That's when she showed up. Zandra Ellington, HOA president. Mid-50s, permanently annoyed, and somehow always holding a clipboard. She didn't walk so much as stomp. Her SUV was parked diagonally across a neighbor's lawn with one of those cheap, magnetic HOA patrol signs slapped on the door. "You can't park there," she barked, pointing at my perfectly aligned truck. I raised an eyebrow. "Why not? It's common property. Reserved for guests. You're violating Article 7, Section 3. Residents must use their driveways." I sipped my coffee. "This isn't common property." She clicked her pen like it was a weapon. "Sir, I'm not in the mood for games. You've been warned before. This is your third notice." "No, it's my first, and Zandra, I own this space and the one in front of the Millers." "And the 8 all the way down to the cul-de-sac," she laughed. "Oh, please." I walked to my garage, unlocked the side door, and came back with a manila folder. I'd kept it ready for years, sealed and labeled HOA War Open in case of stupidity. Inside was the deed. Original plat maps. Property tax receipts. A signed letter from the county clerk verifying ownership of all 22 parallel parking spaces on Pecan Loop. I handed it to her. Her eyes scanned the documents, her lips slowly tightening into a thin, furious line. This can't be valid." "It is." "Even if it is, which it's not, you can't just own public parking. It's not public, it's private easement, and I pay taxes on every inch of it." She shoved the folder back into my chest. "We'll see about that." "You'll be hearing from the board." "You mean the board that voted to tow my truck last week," I said, "because I've already filed a complaint with the city. They're looking into property theft, actually." Her face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Nope." "And if you tow my truck again, I'll press charges. Every fine you've issued for parking here, that's fraud, and fraud's a felony, Zandra." She didn't have a comeback. Just turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering something about calling legal. I watched her drive off the lawn and back down the street. Game on. By the following afternoon, a crisp envelope was taped to my door with painter's tape courtesy of someone too cowardly to knock. Inside was a formal notice, printed on HOA letterhead with the usual aggressive formatting. Bold, underlined, and unnecessarily colored fonts. Notice of hearing. Unauthorized use of subdivisional resources. A meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at the clubhouse. No time for questions, no opportunity to reschedule. Classic. I almost tossed it into the recycle bin, but something told me they weren't done embarrassing themselves. Thursday came fast. I wore jeans and a flannel shirt, just to contrast the board's usual business casual parade. The Oak Creek Trails clubhouse sat at the far end of the development, a stuccoed attempt at grandeur with fake columns and flickering fluorescent lights. Inside, the folding chairs were arranged in a lopsided semicircle. There were about 20 residents, most of them retirees who only showed up when something smelled dramatic. At the front table sat Zandra now with a legal pad, a stack of printed documents, and an unfamiliar man in a gray suit beside her. The man had the weary look of someone who had done a favor he instantly regretted. She didn't wait for formalities. "We'll begin with the complaint against Mr. Dalton for misuse of community assets. Specifically, his recent claim of ownership over Pecan Loop's parking easements." A few neighbors shifted, whispering among themselves. I raised a hand. Question: are we pretending this is a courtroom? Or is this still a book club that got drunk on power? The man in the gray suit, introduced only as Mr. Klein, legal counsel, cleared his throat. Mr. Dalton, this hearing is a procedural necessity to clarify ownership claims and determine whether your actions constitute a violation of community standards. Ownership isn't a claim, it's a matter of record. And since no one on this board bothered to check with the county clerk before issuing fraudulent violations, I brought copies. Again. I passed a folder to the front table. Zandra didn't even touch it. Mr. Klein took a glance, frowning deeper with each page. This deed is detailed. You recorded the transfer 8 years ago. That's correct. The easements were auctioned off as part of the developer's liquidation. I submitted the winning bid, filed the paperwork, and have paid annual taxes since. You can verify it all online. One of the residents, a woman named Connie who normally kept to herself, stood up. So wait, are you saying those parking spots aren't controlled by the HOA at all? They never were. I turned toward her. They're privately owned, maintained at my expense, and legally separate from the HOA's jurisdiction. Which means all those fines Zandra's been issuing, they're unenforceable. Zandra's voice cracked. You're twisting the intent of the community charter. These spaces were always meant for guests. There's a big difference between intent and legal authority. You can't regulate something you don't own. A man at the back, Gary, who once got fined for holiday decorations being too reflective, stood up too. Then why did you let them get away with it all this time? I didn't care, until they tried towing my truck. Zandra's face turned a shade darker. You're creating division, undermining the cohesion of this neighborhood. No, Zandra. You did that when you started enforcing fake rules and hoping nobody would challenge you. Mr. Klein held up a hand. This isn't productive. Regardless of personal opinions, the documents are valid. The easements are not under HOA jurisdiction. Any attempt to fine or regulate use of the spaces is, at minimum, overreach and potentially unlawful. Someone near the front audibly gasped. I turned back to the room. And here's the part I didn't mention yet. After receiving your first violation notice, I submitted a complaint to the county assessor and the Office of Code Compliance. They're opening a formal investigation into the HOA's conduct. Specifically, unauthorized enforcement on private property and misuse of community funds. Zandra shot out of her chair. That's slander. No, it's a paper trail, and I've got emails from both departments confirming receipt of the complaint. One of them flagged your towing order from last week as potentially criminal attempted conversion of private property. That's felony territory. There was a sudden hush. Even Mr. Klein looked rattled. I continued. Since we're discussing misuse of funds, I also requested the HOA's expense reports for the last 2 years. You paid over $14,000 to a private security firm for parking enforcement. I'd love to know how that was approved, considering you don't own a single inch of parking real estate. A neighbor in the second row, Harold, an Army vet with a cane and zero patience, grunted. Hold on. That's our dues money, sure is. Gasps and muttering rippled across the room. Someone said, I want a refund. Another shouted, where's the treasurer? Zandra tried to speak, but her voice cracked again. I looked straight at her. You've been playing sheriff with other people's property and using the HOA's budget like a slush fund. That ends tonight. Mr. Klein gathered his papers quickly. I recommend the board suspend all enforcement actions related to parking until this matter is resolved legally. I'll be recusing myself from further involvement. He stood and walked out, leaving Zandra staring at the door like it had betrayed her. After a moment, Harold turned to the crowd. We need a vote, emergency recall. Several neighbors nodded. I second it, Connie said. The bylaws allowed it. 3 signatures to trigger a recall vote, 15 to make it binding. By the time I left the clubhouse, 20 names were on the petition. The next morning, Zandra's SUV was gone, so was the magnetic sign, but a new notice appeared this time on her mailbox. Pending recall vote, HOA board president. Someone had duct-taped it there with a smiley face drawn in Sharpie. I made coffee and sat on my porch, watching as neighbors gathered in twos and threes, talking louder than usual. Change was coming, and this time it wasn't pushed through behind closed doors. The HOA had tried to play landlord with property they didn't own. Now they were about to find out what happened when the tenants knew the law better than the landlords. The recall vote was scheduled for Saturday morning, but by Friday night, Oak Creek Trails looked like it was prepping for a local election. Handwritten flyers were taped to lampposts. A couple of teenage kids were passing out printed notices door to door. One family had even decorated their mailbox with little red, white, and blue flags and a sign that just read, "It's our neighborhood too." I didn't organize any of it. People were just tired of being steamrolled. Round 9 that night, I heard a knock, not the usual timid tap either. This was a full-on knock, 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 like someone had something to prove. On the other side of the door was a man in a short-sleeved dress shirt, tie too tight, clipboard in hand. He didn't introduce himself, just flashed a city badge. "You Everett Dalton?" he asked, already irritated. "Depends." "Am I being served or surveilled?" He didn't laugh. "We got a complaint filed with code enforcement about unauthorized signage and obstruction of right-of-way. Came from someone on the HOA board." I leaned against the door frame. "And," he flipped through his clipboard, "says you've erected barriers along Pecan Loop. Claims you're using private property claims to block community access. Did they send you any photos?" He turned the clipboard toward me. It showed a blurry image of one of the parking spots with a single orange traffic cone next to it. I recognized it immediately. Hadn't even come from me. The Miller kid had left it there after practicing bike jumps. "Tell me that looks like a barrier to you." The officer exhaled. "It doesn't, but I'm required to follow up." "They also said you posted fraudulent notices threatening legal action." I posted a copy of the deed and a warning that tampering with private property could lead to charges. "That's not a threat, that's a statement of fact." He shifted his weight. "Look, off the record. This whole neighborhood has been calling our office nonstop. Half say you're some kind of vigilante, the other half want you to run for mayor. Not interested in either." "Well, I'm marking this one closed." "But they're clearly trying to bury you in complaints." Before he left, I handed him a folder. "Here's documentation for every parking space in case they call again." He tucked it under his arm. "Smart. Good luck tomorrow." By sunrise, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Not just residents, 2 local news vans had shown up, one from the city station and another from some podcast I'd never heard of. Someone had tipped them off that an HOA president might be facing criminal charges. I hadn't expected the sheriff's department to come too, but they did. A deputy walked in just after the meeting started, waited patiently at the back and stood like a statue, arms crossed over his vest. Zandra wasn't at the front table. Instead, it was the treasurer, a wiry man named Curtis who always looked like he wanted to disappear into his own collar. He tapped the mic. "Due to recent developments, President Ellington has voluntarily stepped back from her duties pending the outcome of legal inquiries." I leaned forward. "Legal inquiries?" He cleared his throat. "We've been contacted by the district attorney's office. They've requested access to the HOA's financial records, specifically invoices related to third-party enforcement contracts and unauthorized towing operations." Murmurs swept the room. Connie, seated 2 rows ahead of me, turned. "Is that why Zandra isn't here?" Curtis didn't answer. But the deputy in the back did. "She's currently being interviewed downtown. We executed a warrant this morning for HOA financial files. There's probable cause for fraudulent use of association funds, plus coercion related to misrepresentation of property rights." Someone gasped. A man near the left wall stood up. "Coercion? Are you saying she committed a crime?" The deputy didn't flinch. It's under investigation, but any board member who knowingly signed off on those towing orders could be named. That includes falsifying jurisdiction over private land. Curtis dropped his pen. I stood. Do we even need to vote on the recall now? Curtis looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Bylaw procedure still requires a formal count, but yes. If more than 50% of homeowners sign, the recall is automatic. They passed around clipboards. People signed like they were swearing oaths. Some added comments beside their names. One wrote, "About time." Another wrote, "You don't own us." After the vote, Curtis, pale and sweating, took the mic again. Effective immediately, the board acknowledges the recall of Zandra Ellington. We'll be appointing an interim president pending new elections. I stepped forward. Before we all go home, I have a motion. Curtis blinked. You're not on the board. I'm a property owner, and according to Section 9 of your own charter, any member of the association can propose a motion at a public meeting if supported by 10 or more signatures. He didn't argue. I held up a page. We're proposing the HOA formally acknowledge the privately owned status of all parking easements along Pecan Loop and cease any regulatory or enforcement actions connected to those spaces. Further, the HOA shall issue refunds to any resident fined for parking in those spaces over the past 6 years. Curtis looked like he might be sick. We'll need to consult legal counsel. You already did. He walked out 2 nights ago. The motion carried. Over 70 residents raised their hands. Only 2 abstained. None opposed. Outside, neighbors were talking in clusters. Some were laughing, others just shaking their heads. I caught part of a conversation between 2 younger couples. One of them said, "It's like we've been living under a dictatorship and didn't even know it." As I headed back toward my house, someone fell into step beside me. It was Harold, the Army vet with the cane. "You know," he said, "there's gonna be a lot of cleanup after this," I figured. "You thinking of running for the board?" "No, I've got enough on my plate just owning the pavement," he chuckled once. "Well, folks respect you now, just don't disappear," I nodded. Back home, I found a small stack of envelopes wedged under my mailbox. Refund checks. The HOA had apparently decided not to waste time. Each one had a short apology typed in cold, formal language. I didn't need mine, but I knew a few neighbors who did. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea and watched as the miller's kids set up a ramp again. This time, no cones, no notes, no threats. The street finally felt like it belonged to the people who lived on it and the HOA. They'd been reminded what happens when you try to control what you don't own, especially when the guy you're targeting knows exactly where the lines are drawn and owns every inch of them. The following week brought a kind of quiet that felt earned. No new notices, no threats. No one pacing the sidewalk with a clipboard. Just neighbors out walking dogs, watering plants, or waving from driveways without that wary glance over their shoulders. But the surface calm didn't distract me from the fact that the real mess hadn't fully unraveled yet. On Wednesday morning, I received a certified envelope from the county prosecutor's office. Inside was a subpoena not for me, but for my documentation. They were officially entering the second phase of their investigation into Oak Creek Trail's HOA board. Apparently, what started as a property dispute had cracked open something far more serious. At noon, I met with Detective Megan Roth at the county building. She had a sharp way of listening silent, but with eyes that never stopped moving. Her desk had a thin folder labeled Oak Creek Trail's HOA financial irregularities. She didn't offer coffee, just a pen and a legal pad, and told me to walk her through the paper trail. "They authorized at least 30 tows," I said, pointing to the printed list of license plates and dates I'd obtained through a public records request. Each one was invoiced by a company called Silverlock Compliance Services. That's not a licensed towing company, it's a shell. I traced the address. It's a P.O. box registered under the name Wallace Ellington. Megan looked up. Relation, Zandra's younger brother. He's not listed on any towing licenses in this county or the next 3 over, but he's been collecting checks from the HOA for over 2 years. She scribbled something. How much? Just under $48,000. That got her attention. She pulled her keyboard closer and started typing. You've already submitted this to the DA last week, but I figured if you're building a case you'd want originals. She nodded once. We do. We've already frozen the HOA's operating accounts. No one's allowed to issue payments until further notice. What's interesting is, we also found bank activity showing funds transferred into a private mutual fund tied to a firm in Nevada. Guess whose name was on that account? Not Wallace. Zandra. She's been moving association dues into private investments. That's securities fraud if we can prove she was misrepresenting the purpose of the funds. I leaned back. So she's not coming back anytime soon. Megan closed the folder. She won't be coming back at all if this sticks. We're preparing to file multiple felony charges: theft by deception, unlawful financial gain, and criminal conspiracy. If your documents hold up in court, you just helped expose a racketeering operation. Driving home, I replayed that last line. I'd started all this just wanting to be left alone. Now it looked like I'd helped dismantle a small-scale criminal network masquerading as a neighborhood committee. By Friday, the fallout had gone public. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, HOA President Under Investigation for Fraud and Property Misuse. It read like a financial thriller. They'd included quotes from residents, some anonymous, others not describing years of unexplained fines, sudden dues increases, and disappearing funds meant for landscaping that never seemed to get done. One resident, a retired art teacher named me, even spoke about being threatened with foreclosure for a payment she'd already made. The board had claimed her check never arrived. Now we knew why. Saturday brought the emergency community meeting, this one called by the interim board. It was held outside since nobody wanted to go back inside the clubhouse with the old board's fingerprints still everywhere. Lawn chairs lined the sidewalk. Someone brought a microphone and a Bluetooth speaker. It felt less like a meeting and more like a block revival. Curtis, the reluctant treasurer, took the mic. He looked like he hadn't slept since the last vote. We've received official notice from the county prosecutor, he said, voice steady. Zandra Ellington has been charged with 5 felony counts. 2 for theft, 1 for fraud, 1 for conspiracy, and 1 for obstruction related to her interference in the ongoing investigation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She has been permanently removed from the board. All existing fines issued under her administration are being voided. Refunds will continue to be processed. As of this morning, we've returned over $19,000 to residents. Murmurs of approval moved through the group. He continued. In addition, the county has recommended we dissolve all contracts with outside enforcement services until a third-party audit is complete. That includes all parking, landscaping, and compliance monitoring. I raised a hand. Curtis nodded to me. I'd like to motion that the board initiate changes to the HOA charter, I said. Specifically, to prevent any future board from operating without transparent financial oversight. That includes mandatory quarterly disclosures of all expenditures and an independently elected oversight committee made up of residents who are not on the board. There were cheers. Not polite applause, actual cheers. Curtis looked relieved. We welcome that motion. In fact, we've already begun drafting amendments. We'll post them publicly for review next week. Another resident, a single father named Marcus, stood and asked, "What happens to the leftover dues that aren't accounted for?" Curtis answered carefully. Once the audit is complete, any unallocated funds will be returned proportionally or allocated to a resident-approved project. We'll vote on that once we know the full amount. It was the first time I'd seen Marcus smile all year. After the meeting, I was approached by a young woman I hadn't met before. She introduced herself as Leela, a nurse who worked nights and had recently moved in with her partner. "You're Everett, right?" she asked. "I just wanted to say thanks." I didn't realize how bad it was until someone actually stood up. I shook her hand. Wasn't just me, it took everyone paying attention for once. She nodded. Still, you shined a light, that matters. Later that evening, I got a call from Detective Roth. She didn't waste time. Thought you'd want to know, she said. We just arrested Wallace Ellington. We found contracts forged in his name, plus over $20,000 in cash hidden in a storage unit. We're filing additional charges for impersonating a licensed contractor. I let out a slow breath. How far does this go? Farther than we expected. But thanks to your documentation, we've got a solid case. Honestly, we don't see residents this thorough very often. After we hung up, I walked the block. The air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. A few houses had lights strung across porches. Kids were playing tag around the mailboxes. No one was watching over them. No one needed to. At the far end of the loop, I passed the Millers, who were setting up a small projector for an outdoor movie night. They waved me over, offered a chair. I stayed for half the film. On the way back home, I noticed something new. A small wooden post had been staked into the grass beside the first parking space on the street. On it was a handmade sign that read, "Everett's Row free parking, no clipboards allowed." I didn't laugh out loud, but I felt something lighter settle in my chest. Back on my porch, I sipped a cold drink, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood finally breathing easy. There'd be more meetings, sure, more decisions to make, but for the first time in years, we'd be making them together with the lights on and the doors open. No more shadows, no more fake fines. Just neighbors and pavement and the quiet satisfaction of calling something your own because you earned it, defended it, and refused to be pushed off of it. The street was calm. And this time, it truly belonged to the people who lived on it.